What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about Thailand? For me, I've just been to Bangkok. So for me, it's crowds and temples, heat and street food, beaches and scooters, people and more people. But what if I were to tell you there's a better way to see Thailand? A slower paced way, a way to see up close and personal the rural side of Thailand and the people that live there. That's what we're going to be doing today, is exploring Thailand by bicycle for an authentic adventure in the land of smiles. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and today we're going to explore rural Thailand by bike. We're going to start in Bangkok and head north almost to the Myanmar border. It's an exciting adventure, and I can't wait to share it with you. But before we get started, I wanted to remind you about the new companion podcast, the Adventure Travel Show podcast, where you learn the how-tos of adventure travel. It's on alternate Thursdays to this podcast. Be sure to check it out. And now, let's get started with cycling rural Thailand. Can you start by introducing yourself and perhaps telling us your age?
Okay, I'm Emily Sedgwick, and I'm 67 years old.
We met because of adventure travel that we're going to be talking about, cycling in Northern Thailand. How did you get involved in adventure travel to start with?
My husband and I have done a lot of trips. We like to do self-guided bicycle trips. We've done a lot in Europe, but then we decided we wanted to go to other places more different or more interesting than Europe. And it's really, most places you can't do self-guided, or it's just easier to do guided trips. So we've been to India, to Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, and on those type of trips.
Do you mainly do cycling, or do you also do hiking or paddling trips, or are you basically cyclists?
Hiking. Well, my husband and I do cycling. I do I do hiking with friends because he doesn't like to hike as much, and we don't do any paddling. We just don't like it that much.
All right. And then was it a change of decision to, instead of doing the typical touristy kinds of vacations, to do these adventure vacations? Because it is completely different than going to Paris and touring Paris versus going out and biking Tuscany.
Right. I'm happy going anywhere. I love to travel. I'll go anywhere. But my husband preferred biking and rural areas to going to cities. So we just started doing this. The first year that we did it was the first year that we got both of our kids to go to sleepaway camp so that we had time in the summer. And that was our first trip in France in the Loire Valley. And we just really liked it. And we often combine it with a short final few days in a city, which is about right for us. So like we spent a few days in Paris after that, and then we went to Barcelona after a trip in Spain.
Okay, that sounds similar to how I do it too, because I do want to see some of the iconic sites of the world, but I'm finding more and more that I'd rather be at their national parks.
Yes, right.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about a cycling trip that you did in the rural parts of Northern Thailand. What made you choose that?
Well, we had taken a trip with Art of Bicycling in India, and we loved that trip, and we thought the organization was really good, and they had done a really good job. So we looked for other trips that they were doing, and we're interested in Thailand because we've been to other areas near Thailand, but we've never been there, so it just seemed like the right trip for us.
So I've been to Bangkok and just in that area, but I imagine, obviously Bangkok's a huge city being the capital. What struck you most about the landscapes that you're seeing on your bike trip?
On the bike trip itself, it was very rural, very agricultural, lots and lots of rice paddies, lots of just different vegetables and different things being grown, sugarcane. It just was very agricultural. And then there were parks where we saw lots of elephants, and just there was a good mix of different things to see.
So it was interesting to look at throughout the whole time?
Yes. Even though we liked the bicycling best in the last half of the trip, the first half was very flat. It was nice because there were a lot of nice things to look at, but the bicycling itself was too flat for what we like. But then as we got further north, it got hillier, and that was more to our liking.
Right, that's what I was noticing too from reading the reviews, that I guess the scenery, because it'll change much more too when you start getting in the hills. And also I imagine it's cooler because Thailand can be a little bit warm. You went in December, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and it was really a perfect temperature. I don't remember it ever being too hot, but it was plenty warm. It was, I don't know, in the 80s Fahrenheit. I'm not sure, but I don't remember. I would have, if it had been too hot, I would have remembered that.
So why don't you give us a brief overview of the trip, and then we're going to talk about some of the different things that you did along the way. So tell us like how long the trip was and some of the highlights, and we'll dig a little deeper.
Okay, it was 2 weeks or close to 2 weeks. We flew into Bangkok. We didn't get much chance to see Bangkok, but we weren't particularly excited about Bangkok, especially the pollution was just really bad. And so we were glad to get out of Bangkok. And then we drove for 2 or 3 hours north to get started. And then every day we rode on bicycles quite a bit, 40 miles or so. And then usually there'd be either at the beginning or at the end, we'd be in the van, either like driving out of a town to get started or driving into a town at the end. And we went just further north, starting with, like I said, sort of flat areas, and then getting into more hilly, more just sort of nature areas, and finishing in Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai.
And this was a fully guided trip, right?
Yes.
So did you have a guide and a driver?
Yes, we had a guide and a driver, and it was a group trip, but we were the only two that signed up for it, which I have no idea why. But we were surprised that they would run it for two people. At first, we didn't like the idea of it just being two of us and a guide and a driver, but it worked out great because the guide was so personable. He was just great to be with, and the driver was really nice also. So the four of us would eat our meals together, and we were together a lot of the time, and it was fine. But it wasn't our choice to just be the two of us and the guide. It just worked out that way.
Yeah, I believe Art of Bicycle Trips has a 2-person minimum, which is kind of cool. I know that I booked some trips that I've already booked the flights and all that, and if they don't get enough people, I'm kind of stuck.
Yes.
And all right, so your first stop was, and I'm terrible with pronunciation, so please correct me when I'm blowing it here. The Ayutthaya? Did I say that anywhere near close?
I have no idea if you're right or not. That sounds right. And I'm really bad on remembering names, especially things that are in another language that have no meaning to me. So don't count on me for the correct names and pronunciations.
All right, well, I'll have all the spelling in the show notes and on the website at activetraveladventures.com. But I'm going to pronounce it Ayutthaya. And this was the second capital of Thailand. Do you have some memories, or can you tell us a little bit about that?
This was the area where we went to a park and saw a lot of Buddhist relics. And that was new to us at the time. Later, we saw a lot more. We had been to Myanmar and had seen a lot of Buddhist relics there, but it was different than just the form of them, the materials they were made out of. And these were just very nice parks where you could just walk around, enjoy the air and the trees, and look at a bunch of different Buddhas. So that was mainly our experience there.
Yeah, from my research, it looks like the Burmese army came and plundered in about 1767, and after they destroyed the capital, that's when it then moved to Bangkok, and they just never rebuilt.
Right. There were numerous times where things had been stolen from Thailand by Myanmar, like not in the recent past, but in the sort of medieval or 18th century time. So we heard about that many different occasions.
Cool. All right. Then your next place that you went to was Nakam Sawan, which translates to Heavenly City. You're in a flat area, but it's up on a hill.
Right.
All right. Then one of the key stops that you went to, again, is Sukhat Hayai. I'm going to spell this out again. And that was a UNESCO World Heritage historical area. Do you tell us a little bit about that?
Again, there was a lot of Buddhist relics, and we just enjoyed them, even though it's not like we're interested in Buddhism as a religion, but just that they were so important to the people there. so well preserved. And I think we were there on a day when there was some kind of a celebration, and I'm not sure if it was a local celebration or countrywide, but there was marching bands, and it was really quite something to see. The number of people involved in these marching bands, men and women, all kinds of instruments and dancers, and that was something to see.
That's very cool. That town was Thailand's original capital. So the country itself celebrates that as their birth of a nation, even though they had some other places beforehand. This is the first town that they have many recordings of. So they celebrate this as their founding place of the country. So I'm not sure if that's what you saw there, but that's one of their major celebrations of the year, and it's celebrated throughout the country.
I think that's what it was. I think you're right. We couldn't ride our bike. It was so crowded that we couldn't ride our bikes. We sort of walked our bikes along with the parade, but it was really something to see.
Yeah, that's really cool that you were there at that time. You went to another cool town called Lampang that they call the horse carriage city because they still use that for transport to get around. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
And I remember we went to a palace, and outside of the palace, there was plenty of opportunities for tourists to ride in horse carriages. We didn't do that, but we saw a lot of people doing it while they were, like, they'd go to the palace and then come out of the palace and go on a ride in carriage. That's what I remember about that.
I got the impression that the locals were still using those as transport.
I really couldn't tell you. I don't remember.
Well, that town is considered by many Thais to be the last paradise of Thailand. So it's one of the local favorite towns. And they also have the Elephant Conservancy Center there. Did you get a chance to go there?
Yeah, well, we went to several different places where it was elephant sanctuaries. And I'm not sure what towns that they were in, but we saw lots of places where elephants were being taken care of. And we saw other places where elephants were used for the tourists, but not in an exploitative way. It was like they seemed to be well treated, but the tourists could take rides on them, which we also didn't do because we've done it before. And I thought once was enough.
And there seems to be a trend of getting away from the riding of the elephants as a tourist attraction.
Yes.
So let's talk about some of the other places you visited, in particular, Chiang Mai, which is a place I've often thought about going to spend the winter there. I've heard it's so lovely.
We had a great time in Chiang Mai. I just remember going to the market and just seeing all kinds of things for sale, both flowers, vegetables, and also just lots of different kinds of things. I actually bought a winter hat there, which seemed a little odd because it was it was so warm. It wasn't clear what they would ever use a winter hat for, but it was perfect for Boston, and I've been wearing it in the winter ever since. It's just a nice feeling to the area, and lots of things to buy and just places to go around looking at.
And you're starting to get in the hills now, aren't you? Isn't Chiang Mai either in the hills or the mountains?
Yeah, there were definitely hills. There were places we never rode on a place that was like too hilly for us. There were hills, but mined hills. There was one place, and I can't remember, where we had gone on a river and spent like an hour in the morning going from one place to another on the river. And then we got to a road that was just incredibly steep. We just walked up it. It was about, I don't know, a mile or so of just very steep riding. And there were a couple of other times when there was very steep riding that we weren't necessarily expected to ride, and I rode almost all of it. My husband somewhat less. That was really taxing, but short. Like the whole thing was over in maybe 45 minutes.
And also I noticed too that Art of Bicycle Trips now offers e-bikes in Thailand. So that's an option, particularly if people are of different levels of ability to bike.
Right. I mean, we've been hearing much more about that. My husband had considered getting an e-bike, but hadn't, had decided against it. We didn't see a lot of e-bikes, but I know there were some, and that they're definitely increasing in popularity.
I want to mention one other thing about Chiang Mai before we move on. They have a festival on the full moon of the 12th month of the Thai lunar calendar, which in the Western calendar is usually sometime in November, called Loi Kramphang. And thousands of people make these floating banana leaf containers that they decorate with flowers and candles, and they put them in the waterway and in mass to worship the goddess of water. And then they do those lanterns, those hot air balloons out of paper that they launch in the air. So I bet you that would be just spectacular to go. And that's also since it's in November, it's a good time of month to go. It's the beginning time that you can go to this area. So if I do this trip, I'm going to try to time it for that time frame.
That would have been really nice to see, and it would fit with the kind of thing we did see, but we never saw anything like as elaborate as that.
It sounds like a really cool thing to do. So let's talk a little bit. Do you get a lot of interaction with the locals by traveling by bike?
Yes. One of my best memories of the trip was we stopped in a school playground, which at first we didn't realize was a school playground. We just stopped there for our rest stop. And then we saw all these kids in uniforms. They gradually came over to speak to us. At first they were sort of looking at us like, who are these people? Then they came over and started talking to us. We were there with the guide, so he could interpret. And then the coolest thing was they were all studying English, and they had their English workbooks with them, even though it was like recess. So I'm not sure why they did. So they were practicing their English on us and asking us questions in English that we were answering. And they just were delightful to us, and we were delightful to them. And it just was really a nice encounter to be able to actually speak to some young kids that were probably 8 or 9, third or fourth grade, around that.
And that reminds me of when I was in Bhutan at a festival. 3 kids came up and introduced themselves because they could tell I was a foreigner. And they wanted to practice their English and just check me out. And I think these local interactions is what makes the trips.
Definitely. We found that generally the Thai children were a little bit more reticent than either the children that we had met in Vietnam or in India, but they were still happy to see us and they'd say hi, but it wasn't like they sort of ran out to greet you the way people in some other countries do. And the guide said that was just typical Thai, that they're sort of reticent around foreigners, but still, willing to engage. The other thing that was interesting that I remember I went back over some pictures and I remembered some things, that there's various sort of little rural factories, or not exactly factories, but for example, there was a place that would take the raw rice and do whatever has to be done to it to make it like finished rice that you would buy in the store. And it was like something out of the early industrial revolution, where there was, all these chutes that they would put the rice through, and something would happen to it and it would come out different from the way it went in, and then they'd put it through another chute, and then in the end it would come out as, the rice the way you buy it in the store. And we saw several examples of that. It was just like maybe 3 or 4 people working there, and then another person like transporting the rice to wherever it was going for market. But we saw a lot of that, so just little agriculture related but more industrial activities. That was interesting.
That's cool too. Now you're also, because you're touring the rural areas by bike, I imagine you're going to places where there aren't many tourists.
Right. People were sort of surprised. It was not like we were a total oddity, but they hadn't seen many of us, and they weren't quite sure, how to react to us. So we saw like really sort of very authentic. Whatever it was that was going on was what was going on, and not being done for us. There was one time that we stopped, and there was a large group of people, mostly men, gathered around a television. So we wanted to know what it was. So we stopped and watched for a while, and there was a boxing championship, I think, in Thailand that everybody was watching. Like when we went along the road, we saw other people with their TVs on watching this. And apparently a lot of people bet money on it. And it's just like this sort of big thing that everybody is engaged in. So we stopped and watched for a while with them, and people were excited if the person they had bet on was winning. that was pretty cool.
Did you feel welcomed by the locals?
Definitely welcomed. And everybody was friendly to us, but not like overly excited about us, but just very friendly.
And how about the food? Thai's got some great food.
Oh, we loved everything we had. There was only one night that we didn't eat Thai food. We went on a special expedition to get like not American food, but like not Thai food. And that was great too. But every other meal was Thai food. And what was really interesting is that even though it was all local Thai food, it was all different. It wasn't like we were eating like the same thing over and over. It was like different kinds of sauces, different meats or different vegetables. They would serve us like 7 or 8 different things at one sitting, like sometimes more than we wanted, but it was all like you'd try a little of this, a little of that. And it just was all delicious and all had sort of that Thai flavoring, but in completely different forms. It was great. It was really good.
So is the guide selecting the things for you to try, or how did all that work? Because if I looked at a menu, I wouldn't even know what the things are to even know what to order.
Yes. We might say, oh, I'm interested in this or interested in that, but he would select the things that he thought what we would want. And if there were other things we would have wanted, I don't know what they were, but he really made a good selection. And he also was very health conscious. I remember there was one very local, small operation type of restaurant for local people. And he took us there, but he said that we could only order certain things there, that it wasn't safe to order things that weren't hot. But if we had soup and things like that, he said it would be perfectly safe. And so that's what we did. And he wouldn't have let us order stuff that we would feel would be not safe. So we got the best of both worlds. We got local things that were being made for local people, and we didn't have to worry. Neither of us got sick at all in any way. So that was great to feel like we had the freedom to eat kind of street food without having to worry.
That's definitely a big asset to having a local guide, because they do know where it's okay for you to go and not to go, and where some of the cool places are you would never even consider, a hole in the wall that might be outstanding.
Right, exactly.
Was your guide also able to help translate some of the cultural things that you'd see and give you some background and history and such?
Yes, absolutely. He was really, really well versed on that. Not that we retained a lot of it, but that it was just nice to hear, all the history. And he talked about local politics too. This was right at the time when they were preparing to have the election. And, the military had finally said, yes, we can have an election, but they were postponing and postponing. He wasn't an activist, but he was very aware of things that were going on, and he supported the other party that was not, the one that the military had overthrown. And so he was very open about the situation going on, and very disappointed when they postponed the election. And I'm sure he's disappointed that the military basically controlled the election so that they would get the candidates they wanted. And he told us a lot about things that we still don't quite understand, like that the royal family is Hindu, they're not Buddhist, that everybody seems to accept that. And he told us about how the previous king had been really popular and everybody had been very reverent about him, but the present king was not popular because people thought he was just kind of a playboy and not really taking the office seriously. So he told us lots of stuff that was very interesting, the kind of the real dirt, on what was going on.
That's really cool. I love learning about the insights of the different cultures of the countries that I visit. And also he can help you translate so you can have other interactions with the locals, right?
Yes, absolutely. Right. So, he taught when there was somebody, especially we wanted to talk to, or something that was of interest to us, he would facilitate conversation. So that was great.
Cool. Tell us a little bit about the accommodations.
They were great. Everything was great. We stayed in Bangkok in just a regular hotel. It was fine, nothing special, but that was just like one night. And then each night we were in a different kind of accommodation, but they were all really special. The one I remember the best was this guy from somewhere in Europe, had married a woman from Thailand and had decided that he wanted to open a very kind of special type of hotel in the rural area of Thailand. And so they had this beautiful land overlooking rice paddies, and the two of them, or according to him, mainly her, had for years like built this resort that was only going to have like 8 rooms or something. It just was a very special place, and a beautiful pool overlooking the rice paddies. And they would take you into town if you wanted to go. I can't remember which town this was. And it was just a very, he had a very interesting story about him. He had just given up his life in Europe and was going around Thailand by motorcycle and met this woman and then decided, okay, Thailand, that's where I'm going to stay. That was really interesting. And this other place that was quite sort of down to earth and was cabins that were kind of like the kind of cabins that you'd see here in national parks, and a little bit sort of lower standard, I guess, but just sort of interesting in themselves for being sort of a different type of accommodation with, again, delicious food. So everything was great. And they chose the accommodations really well.
It looked to me by the reviews, too, that almost all the accommodations had a swimming pool, which might have been nice to relax in it after a bike ride.
Yeah, we are very big on swimming pools, and we always ask, any trip that we go on, we always ask, for places with pools. And this, I don't know if it was because we asked, but I think if there was any place without a pool, the place that I was just describing did not have a pool, but that was fine. It was actually quite cool around that area. But in every other place with a pool, we went in the pool. We just really liked them. And the pools were very well designed and sort of added to the ambiance of the place. So that was great for us.
You talked about seeing elephants. How about other wildlife?
We saw, I think, a rhinoceros and some huge pig that was, I guess, a boar that was their whole capital investment was in their boar. I'm not sure what exactly they were going to do with the boar, but we saw various living animals. We also saw animals that were used as, like, I don't know, call it a sacrifice or sort of a something where in different Buddhist ceremonies they seem to have animals that had been sacrificed, which was interesting. We didn't see tons of wildlife beyond that, but
how about birds in the mountain areas?
We saw lots of birds. We're not bird people as far as like identifying them, but yes, there were lots of birds in the mountains. And, we went to lots of places where there were, like lily pads in the water, and there were lots of fish. There was a temple where there was a pond with lots of fish that you were encouraged to buy these little things of food and throw it into the pond, and all the fish would come and eat the food. That was like part of the routine at this temple. It was like a cave temple where you had to go up lots of steps to get into the cave where the Buddha was, but there was a lot of other things, including the fish at this place.
One thing that makes me a little bit nervous about going on a cycling trip is cycling in traffic and cycling on the roads. Can you tell us a little bit about what the trails were like, or the paths or the roads, and whether you were ever a little bit nervous, or just give us an overview of all that, please?
I never felt unsafe at all. We were mostly on roads of some kind, sometimes like very rural roads where there were almost no cars, and other places where there were cars, but not a lot of cars. I never felt at all unsafe. We've ridden in a lot of other areas where there was, more cars than I'm comfortable with, but we never had that problem at all. And there was a lot, in the areas where there were cars, there was plenty of shoulder so that you never felt like the cars were a threat. And a lot of places there just weren't that many cars, so it was fine.
On an interview I did on cycling through Vietnam and Cambodia, they had said that the cars are just so used to bicyclers versus where I live, where you're an anomaly. that they were always on the lookout for bikes anyway, so that they actually felt safer biking in Vietnam than they did here.
Oh, that's interesting. Because in Vietnam, I'd say there was a lot more traffic. I mean, when we were in Vietnam, we were more in urban areas. I mean, we were in a lot of rural areas, but in the urban areas, there were so many scooters, and you had to look out for them. And there were scooters in Thailand too, and I guess I would say a lot of them, but never in a way that I felt like was unsafe. They would pass us, and that was fine. I never felt threatened by them at all.
On a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the most difficult, how would you rank this trip? How hard is it? You're biking between 20 and 50 miles a day.
I would say it would be between 2 and 3. Part of the reason I say that is whenever we wanted to end the day, they would pick us up in the van. And I oftentimes ended up cycling just with the guide, and my husband would get into the van earlier. Like he'd ride most of the time, but then he would be tired maybe 10 or 15 miles before the end, and he would just get in the van, and that was fine. It's sort of what you want to do. For me, I could have done more, but I was happy. I didn't feel like I wanted to. I just could have done more. Doesn't mean I necessarily wanted to. Where it was a good balance, because then we'd get to the hotel in time to take a swim and walk around before dinner.
I like that you weren't utterly exhausted at the end of the day. Did you have enough time to visit some of the villages along the way, as well as at the end of the day?
Yeah, because that was like a priority to do that, and we had it was never like that we were cycling all day. We were always stopping and visiting, and stopping at lunch and spending time visiting before starting again. And we never rode late into the afternoon. We were always done like 3:30, something like that.
Did you feel like you had control over your schedule, or was it like the guide said, you got to move on, we've got to move on, it's time to get going?
No. No, we had control. We wanted to do what he wanted us to do, so it was never an issue. There were maybe a couple of times when we had to meet a boat at a certain time. We crossed a number of rivers or went on a number of rivers, and so we had to be there at a certain time. But it was never a problem. We never, we don't particularly like to get up really early, and we never had to do that. We always had time for a nice breakfast before we start riding. So it was very comfortable.
I see, too, from the itinerary, you went on something called a long-tail boat. What is that?
The boats we went on, I'm not quite sure what that refers to, but these were like long, narrow, motorized canoes. And we went on one quite a distance. Maybe we were on it for an hour or an hour and a half. And the drivers have to be like really, really skilled, because the rivers are sort of low, and you have to have exactly the right to be in the channel and not hitting rocks. You have to know exactly what you're doing and where you're going. And there were rapids, not big rapids, but small rapids, that if I hadn't felt confident in the guy who was driving the boat, I would have been very nervous. But it was great. It was really quite an experience to be in that boat with our bikes and our guide and us and the driver and going through these rapids. It was pretty cool.
What surprised you about the trip?
I don't know. In retrospect, I don't know if it just seems like this to outsiders, but it seemed like people generally were quite happy. We didn't get a feeling of like oppression or a feeling of people not knowing how to make a living. We didn't see people kind of hanging around like unemployed, or it seemed like everybody was working. People seemed happy with what they were doing, and it just seemed like a very sort of positive atmosphere. Now you come home and you read about the military government and things like that, and maybe we were a little bit naive, but it still seemed to us that things were generally going pretty well for people in Thailand.
Is there any advice you'd give to somebody considering this trip?
Well, I'd say do it. The time of year that we did it was great, and I don't know about other times of year. It was nowhere close to hot, So you could probably do it either, a month later and still cool. But I would say it's really a good place to travel. And I think it is important to have a guide unless you speak Thai or just in order to be able to understand what's going on and to meet people. So I think the way we did it was really a good way.
According to my notes, the monsoon stops around late October and it picks up again in May. But another time you need to be a little bit concerned about is around the end of February when the farmers will burn the fields. And so the air will be very polluted and very smoky. And it seems like the time you went, November, December, is a perfect time to go.
Yeah. As far as the burning, there was some burning going on while we were there. But it was something that we could sometimes smell the burning, but never close by. That was the thing that we discussed with the guide a lot about the reasons for doing that and how they're trying to get away from that it's not necessary to do it. It's just easier to do it that way. And that the government could subsidize people to change the way they do it so that there would be less burning. But it hasn't happened yet. So that is an issue.
If you're not sure what we're talking about here, the farmers will burn the fields after they harvest the crops, and then the burning of the fields will get rid of all the debris, whereas where I live, the farmers will simply till under that debris and turn that organic matter back into the soil.
Yeah, right. And they said, some people do. It's the poorest farmers that do the burning. And like I said, they don't have to do it. Things could be changed, but it hasn't changed yet.
And there's two other towns that we didn't talk about too. One was Chiang Dao, if I say that right. And Chiang, you'll hear that word a lot in Thailand. That means city. So Chiang Dao was, they call it the little Tuscany. It's full of vineyards. Any memories of that?
Yeah. I just remember the vineyards and just being surprised, feeling like it's not like what I expected from Thailand. I just remember, riding by lots of grape trees or whatever they're called. That was really nice.
Did you sample any of the wine to see how it tasted?
I'm not a wine person. I just mainly drink beer. My husband had a lot of the wine, and I think it was good.
And then you ended up in the town of, I think it's Thantan. That's up by, when I was doing the research, it sounds like you're actually in Myanmar, but it's right up in the border of Myanmar, Burma area, and Laos. And there's a confluence of the Burmese people, the Thai people, the Chinese in that area. I bet you that was interesting.
It was interesting. I remember there being just a lot of concern about people from Myanmar coming over the border and the necessity to check the border carefully to make sure that they weren't coming over. That's really what I remember about it, sort of a heightened level of concern and border protection, sort of in a different way than we talk about it here in the United States, but still, worried that people from Myanmar would come over. What I remember about Chiang Rai, which I think was our last real city, maybe getting confused, but that there are these huge pageants of transgender performers, and which apparently has just always been a big thing in Thailand. And just their attitude towards transgender people is, I would say, in advance of the attitude in the United States that you see transgender people around and just like living their lives, and it's an accepted part of Thai culture. And we just saw these shows it was like an evening entertainment. There was a big stage, and there were lots of restaurants. Like you would be eating your dinner and watching these performances that were just very professional and really nicely done. So that's a big thing. I think in Chiang Rai is one of the big activities there to go see that in the evening.
Do you have a favorite memory of the place that when you look back, you say, oh, that day was so good, or that memory was so good?
God, the different things were great for different reasons. And I really liked being in Chiang Mai, partly because there was a variety of things to do. And, we really liked our hotel, and it just was just really nice there. But everything, and like I said, I think in a way it felt like it got better and better, the cycling especially, and just being further in the north. It just, I don't have one favorite thing.
You're really well traveled, Emily. How does this trip compare to some of the other adventure trips you've taken?
Well, it was different in that there were just the two of us. So that really sort of made a difference. We had never traveled in that area with less than maybe 8 or 10 people. So that's sort of a different experience, but it wasn't like negative. It was just different. You really have to have, in that situation, you have to have a guide who's not just very knowledgeable, but also just really good at getting along with people. And that's what really made the trip. I think if we hadn't have had a guide who was so good at his job, maybe it wouldn't have been such a good trip. But he really made the trip.
I do a lot of research before every program, and looking at the reviews for this trip, and in fact, all of our bicycle trips, the reviews for the guides have been outstanding. So I'm really pleased to be able to recommend them and to now be affiliated with them.
Definitely. And it's funny because they sort of know each other. Like when we went to any kind of tourist related thing, our guide would be talking to they'd all know each other. They were like, sort of this cadre of guides who do bicycle trips with Westerners. So, that was nice to see that they sort of have an infrastructure of guides that are ready to be able to do more guiding. He didn't, our guide didn't have that many trips. He does another type of guiding, which is not on bicycles, but he hosts groups of doctors from other countries who, as part of their medical training, come to Thailand and do kind of service for a month, and he kind of hosts them and arranges everything for them. So he he really enjoys doing that too, but he does that because he can't do bike guiding full time. There just isn't the opportunity for it. So, like I said, I think that they have the infrastructure ready to accommodate more type of riding.
Did you see any, or did you have any other interactions with Westerners on your trip?
Very few. And usually when we saw them, we'd say hello. We didn't pretend to not be them. But there were tourists from China, lots of tourists from China, and some from Australia, but generally not the number of tourists that you'd see in Vietnam, for example. More than in Myanmar, but not as many as you would see in some other countries.
It sounds like you got a really authentic experience doing this trip the way that you did, going out to the rural countryside.
Definitely. It really felt that way. To just see the farming and all the different kinds of crops. And this was not agribusiness. This was not tiny farms, but farms that are owned by a family and that the family does the farming and sells the crops. And it just was, just nice to see that still working. Although the guide told us that a lot of the young people, like everywhere else, don't want to stay on the farm. So that there's been sort of movement to Bangkok in particular, a lot of young people going to Bangkok. But that if they had something to do, something to keep them in the rural area, that they would stay there. It's just that they want to do something other than farming.
So it sounds like you had a great time on this adventure and you would recommend it?
Absolutely. Definitely.
So what's next for you and your husband?
Well, we're going on a bike trip in Croatia where you stay on a boat and then every day the boat goes to a different island and you ride your bike on that island. And my husband is getting an e-bike for that because it's quite hilly, but that's supposed to be beautiful.
That sounds fantastic. Hopefully we'll get you back on the show to tell us about that trip when you get back. Any final thoughts or things that you want to share with the listeners?
No, just put Thailand on your list. I think everyone would enjoy it for very many reasons. It's got something for everybody.
Very good. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Emily. I appreciate it.
Yep. Okay.
Next time I go to Thailand or Southeast Asia, for sure, I'm going to do a bicycle trip. I'm so intrigued by what Emily told us today and what we learned about biking in Vietnam and Cambodia with Norm and Karen recently. It just sounds like a really cool way to see a country. And you're not zooming through everything. You actually get to see the country and meet the local people far more than you can, and actually get to cover more territory than you do when I do like my walking holidays. So I'm getting more and more interested in doing this. In fact, I'd like to plan on doing a trip to India and possibly Vietnam next year by bike And I'm not hosting it, mind you, but if any of you guys are interested in joining me, pop me an email at kit@activetraveladventures.com and let's see if we can put something together. I think that would be a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of Thailand. I've got lots more information on the website at activetraveladventure.com. Of course, newsletter subscribers will get the free travel planner with all the details you need to plan this cycling holiday, should you choose to do so. And that comes absolutely free at the beginning of each month for whatever I covered the month ahead of time. And also, subscribers will get any of the handouts that I do for the new podcast, Adventure Travel Show podcast, with the how-tos. So I think I'm packing a lot of punch in an absolutely free newsletter. And remember, I do not spam you or sell your email at all. You just get the one email a month from me, and it usually shows up around the first week of the following month of whatever I covered the previous month. So anyway, check out the website, sign up for it there, or pop me an email and tell me to hook you up. I'll be glad to do it there that way as well. So until next time, I hope you've enjoyed this adventure. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And I apologize for the occasional bobbly audio during this recording. Sometimes the recording software just misbehaves. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.